When I moved to Willowbrook Estates, I thought I'd found the perfect suburban paradise. The houses were pristine, the lawns were manicured, and the HOA seemed reasonable enough on paper. I should have known better when I met Karen Hutchinson during my first week. She introduced herself as the HOA president while I was washing my 1967 Mustang Fastback in my driveway. "Oh, what a beautiful classic car," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I do hope you're not planning to keep it parked outside permanently. We have very strict standards here about vehicle aesthetics." I assured her that my Mustang was in excellent condition and completely street legal. "Well," she replied, "we'll just have to see about that, won't we?" That should have been my first red flag. Karen was the type of person who wielded her tiny amount of authority like a medieval scepter. She had perfectly coiffed blonde hair, always wore a blazer even while walking her small dog, and carried a clipboard wherever she went. Her house sat at the corner of Maple and Oak, a sprawling colonial that she'd painted an aggressive shade of beige to match her personality. Within days, I received my first violation notice. Apparently, my Mustang was parked 1 inch over the approved distance from the sidewalk. I measured it myself, twice, and found this to be completely false, but I moved it anyway. A week later, another notice arrived claiming my car was creating an eyesore due to its age. This was particularly ridiculous considering my Mustang was a pristine restoration that I'd spent 3 years and considerable money perfecting. I decided to attend the next HOA meeting to address these frivolous complaints. The meeting was held in the community center, where Karen sat at the head table like she was presiding over the Supreme Court. When I raised my hand to speak about the unfair targeting of my vehicle, Karen cut me off with theatrical authority. "Mr. Thompson," she announced loudly, "your 1967 vehicle may have been acceptable transportation in the previous century, but this is a modern neighborhood with modern standards. Perhaps you should consider upgrading to something more appropriate for our community." The room fell silent. I calmly explained that classic cars were specifically protected under both state law and the HOA bylaws I'd thoroughly researched. Karen's face turned red as she realized I'd done my homework. "Well," she huffed, "we'll just see about that. I'm sure there are other regulations your antique violates." She made a show of writing something on her clipboard while glaring at me. That night, I received a violation notice claiming my car was too loud, despite the fact that I rarely drove it and always kept it well within noise ordinances. The harassment escalated over the following weeks. Karen would walk by my house multiple times daily, always carrying that infernal clipboard. She measured the distance between my car and the property line so many times that she wore a path in the grass. She filed complaints about everything from the shine of my chrome bumpers being too reflective to claiming my vintage license plates were somehow inappropriate for the neighborhood. I tried reasoning with her directly, even bringing documentation showing that classic cars were explicitly protected under municipal codes. "Listen here," Karen snapped during our conversation. "I don't care what some dusty old law says. This is my neighborhood, and I decide what belongs here. Your museum piece makes us look like some kind of trailer park." Her sense of entitlement was truly breathtaking. Things came to a head on a Tuesday morning in October. I woke up to find my driveway empty. My Mustang was gone. I immediately called the police, assuming it had been stolen, but they informed me it had been legally towed by Morrison's Auto Impound at the request of the HOA for being an abandoned vehicle. I was furious, but determined to handle this through proper channels. At the impound lot, I discovered that Karen had filed paperwork claiming my car hadn't moved in 30 days and was therefore abandoned property. This was completely false. I'd driven it to a car show just 5 days earlier, but she'd apparently convinced the towing company that she had authority to make this determination. The impound fees were already over $400, and they increased daily. I paid the fees and retrieved my car, but this was worn out. That evening, I made some phone calls. You see, what Karen didn't know about me was that I'd recently sold my tech consulting business for a rather substantial sum. I'd moved to Willowbrook specifically because I was semi-retired and wanted a quiet place to enjoy my hobbies. But Karen had just activated my competitive side. My first call was to my attorney, Margaret Chun, who specialized in property law. "This is highly irregular," she confirmed after reviewing the HOA bylaws and Karen's violation notices. "She's clearly exceeding her authority and targeting you specifically. We could pursue harassment charges, but I have a feeling you're thinking of something more creative." She knew me well. My second call was to my old friend David Kim, a commercial real estate broker who'd helped me buy several properties over the years. I need you to find out everything you can about the HOA president's property situation, I told him. Specifically, I want to know if she's planning to sell, buy, or if there are any properties she's particularly interested in. David was intrigued and promised to investigate discreetly. The information David uncovered was absolutely perfect. Karen had been trying to buy the historic Victorian mansion at 1215 Oak Street for over 2 years. The house had belonged to the Whitmore family since 1923, but the elderly owner, Mr. Whitmore, had recently passed away. His estate was finally ready to sell, and Karen had been circling like a vulture, making increasingly aggressive offers to the family. According to David's research, Karen had been obsessively planning her dream renovation of the Victorian. She'd even applied for historic preservation permits and had architectural plans drawn up. The house was everything she wanted: prestigious, historic, and sitting on the largest lot in the neighborhood. It would be her crown jewel, the ultimate symbol of her status as neighborhood royalty. But here's where it got interesting. The Whitmore estate was asking $2.8 million, which was slightly above market value due to the historic designation and prime location. Karen had been approved for a loan, but just barely, and only after providing extensive financial documentation. David discovered she'd stretched her finances to the absolute limit to qualify for this purchase. I asked David to make an offer on my behalf, $3.2 million, all cash, with a 7-day closing period. The estate accepted immediately, much to Karen's shock and fury. But I wasn't done yet. The real genius was in what I planned to do with the property once it was mine. You see, the historic Victorian was zoned for both residential and commercial use due to its age and location. With the right permits, it could legally be converted into a museum or educational facility. And thanks to the Americans with Disabilities Act and local accessibility requirements, any such conversion would require significant modifications to the surrounding properties to ensure proper traffic flow and parking. I spent the next month working with architects, city planners, and historic preservation specialists to develop my plans. The Whitmore Victorian would become the Willowbrook Classic Automobile Museum, a nonprofit educational facility dedicated to preserving automotive history. The museum would feature rotating exhibits of vintage vehicles, host car shows, and offer educational programs for local schools. The best part was that everything was completely legal and even beneficial to the community. The city was thrilled to have a new cultural attraction, especially one that would bring tourists and revenue to the area. The Historic Preservation Society was delighted that the Victorian would be restored to its original glory while serving an educational purpose. Karen, meanwhile, was spiraling. She'd lost her dream house to a mysterious cash buyer, and rumors were swirling about what would happen to the property. She became even more aggressive in her HOA enforcement, as if terrorizing other residents could somehow fill the void where her Victorian dreams used to live. The morning of the museum's grand opening was absolutely beautiful. I'd invited the entire neighborhood, the mayor, representatives from the State Historic Preservation Office, and members of local classic car clubs. The Victorian had been transformed into a stunning showcase of automotive history, with my Mustang prominently displayed in the main gallery as the centerpiece of the 1960s American muscle car exhibit. Karen arrived fashionably late, probably expecting to find some modest car display that she could nitpick and complain about. Instead, she walked into a professional museum space with period-appropriate lighting, climate control, and educational placards describing the cultural significance of each vehicle. The main gallery featured my Mustang alongside a 1969 Camaro, a 1970 Challenger, and several other pristine examples of American automotive excellence. But the real masterpiece was the plaque next to my Mustang. It read, "This 1967 Ford Mustang Fastback represents the pinnacle of American automotive design and engineering." Despite being over 50 years old, vehicles like this remind us that age does not diminish beauty, craftsmanship, or value. This museum exists to preserve and celebrate automotive history for future generations, proving that sometimes the oldest treasures are the most precious of all. I watched Karen read that plaque, and I could see the exact moment when everything clicked into place. Her face went through a fascinating series of expressions: confusion, recognition, horror, and finally, complete devastation. She realized that not only had I bought her dream house out from under her, but I'd turned it into a permanent shrine to the exact type of old car she'd been trying to banish from the neighborhood. The HOA bylaws she'd used to harass me specifically prohibited commercial vehicle storage in residential driveways, but they said nothing about properly zoned museums. My once forbidden classic car was now the star attraction of a legitimate cultural institution, protected by both historic preservation laws and nonprofit status. Karen had spent months trying to get rid of one old car, and I'd responded by bringing dozens of them to the neighborhood permanently. Karen stood frozen in the main gallery, surrounded by the vintage automobiles she'd declared unfit for modern society, displayed in the Victorian mansion she'd dreamed of calling home. The irony was so perfect it was almost poetic. Her face turned ashen as she realized the full scope of what I'd accomplished, and that her own petty harassment had inspired the very thing she'd tried to prevent. I walked over to her with a gentle smile, holding a gleaming brass plaque. "I was wondering if you'd like to do the honors," I said pleasantly. "As HOA president, would you care to officially dedicate the Karen Hutchinson Memorial Gallery? I thought it was only fitting to name our vintage vehicle restoration workshop after the person who inspired this entire museum." The clipboard slipped from her trembling fingers and clattered to the marble floor. Karen looked around one final time at the dozens of classic cars now permanently residing in her former dream home, protected by law and celebrated by the community. She had tried to exile one old car from the neighborhood, and instead had created a sanctuary for hundreds. The woman who had wielded HOA rules like weapons had been defeated by someone who understood that the most elegant victories come not from breaking the system, but from mastering it completely.